Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. We're going to talk about developing paragraphs today. Again, my name's Adam. I'm the English student here at UH Hilo. I'm working on the TESOL certification, so it's going to be fun being able to do a couple of courses for you guys throughout the rest of this semester. I hope you're all doing well. It's in this crazy new world and new way of learning things. If you're anything like me, you're on Zoom classes every day or watching some guy or girl talk on a video just like this one. What I enjoy about this format though is that you can kind of pause it or fast forward or rewind to go back and look at something that maybe you weren't clear about. So I do like this kind of style of learning. So let's just start into it. Paragraphs are a very important part of the writing process. I'm sure everyone's familiar with them. We know what they are. We've been reading paragraphs our whole lives. Almost everything we read is in a paragraph form somehow. And the way that your book describes it as putting up fences around a certain subject. So we're not looking at the entire paper. We're not looking at the individual grammar of each individual sentence. So what we're doing is we're putting sentences inside little fences of the subject that's going on. And it's easy to see as we're reading how paragraphs work, but it gets a little more tricky when you're trying to divide your paper up and stay on subject for each of those paragraphs. Let's just go ahead and look at how we do that. So the most important thing when you're developing a paragraph is to stay on point. You need to figure out what the main point is first before you do that. Typically, paragraphs start with a topic sentence. So this will be a sentence that describes what your entire paragraph is going to be about, and then the rest of the paragraph supports that topic sentence. So that's not always true. You don't always start out with a topic sentence. Next week, we're going to talk about argumentative writing, like you're arguing your point, trying to persuade people to view something in the way that you're looking at it. And sometimes when we're writing like that, we start off with the supporting information and then conclude with our final argument. So there's of course times when your paragraph doesn't always start with a topic sentence, but that's kind of like in lower grade school and stuff, when you're teaching younger kids how to write sentences, usually we say put the topic sentence first and then support it afterwards, which is usually the case, but the rules aren't set in stone for paragraph writing. Narrative writing is a different type of paragraph where maybe the topic is implied or the topic sentence is implied. There's some really good examples in your book. I can't come up with them offhand, but actually there's tons of really good examples for everything that we go through, excuse me, in this presentation. Your book has really good examples of each one of those. So I would encourage you, if you haven't read the chapter in your book already, I think it's W4, take a look at some of those different examples. It really reinforces the different types of paragraphs. And who would have known there were so many types of paragraphs out there? Okay, sticking to the main point is a very important part of writing your paragraph. So again, that's keeping your subject or your topic within that fence, that little fence that you have within the paper. So we're going to the way to do that is just to basically ensure that all of your supporting facts relates back to that topic sentence. That's my dog snoring, if you can hear it. Okay, sticking to the main point. So obviously, don't stray off topic. That's kind of the main thing. And if you do get to the point where you're realizing that you've come off topic, that probably is an indicator that you can go back and then start a new paragraph. Okay? So usually when I'm doing like brainstorming or the beginning part of putting together a paper, sometimes you can kind of just ignore where you're putting paragraphs because you're going to go back and revise the paper, and then you can kind of look a little more closely at what the topics of the paragraphs are. Maybe some part of one paragraph would fit better into a different topic later on, and then you can kind of readjust from there. Okay, let's look at how we develop the main point. Like I said earlier, I think that your book really has good examples of these. So if you get a chance to read that chapter, especially for this section right here, it gives some really good examples on cause and effects and classifying and dividing. So the first one we'll look at is analyzing the cause and effects. You can develop a paragraph on topic by analyzing what causes it or what the effects of that are. The next one is classifying and dividing. The first one, classifying, is putting something into a group. So you're arguing why something belongs within a specific group. And the second one is dividing. And this one I use quite a bit. Usually I'll have a sentence that blah, 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 colon, and these are the ways that it happens. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes you can write the 1, 2, 3, 4 in. Sometimes you just first, next, then, and finally. Maybe you write something like that as a way of breaking something down. A lot of the computer science stuff, computer science writing that I do, you have to break down and categorize things into different parts. Comparing and contrasting is probably the most common way of writing for college writing paragraphs. Usually you'll use an analogy of something that's familiar to everyone on how to describe something that may be more complex that you know really well, but you're wanting to break that down for the reader. All right, here's another chunk of ways that we can use to develop the main point, different types of paragraphs. Defining something is probably the most common. If you're going to have like a standard paragraph that you use in this example, it's probably you're going to define something. Your topic sentence will have the thing you're defining, and then you'll spend the the sentences after that describing what you're defining. Descriptive paragraph is another one. May see this more in a lot of the fictional books that you may like to read. I hope we get a chance. Hopefully next week we can do this live. I was kind of curious how many guys are English majors and what I think when we did introductions on the first week of class, we didn't really ask what people were doing for their degrees or what they were trying to do. But I hope there's a handful of English students out there. Anyway, the descriptive paragraph is something most people who are avid readers are familiar with. That's what you see in usually setting up a new chapter in a book is going to be a descriptive paragraph of what's going on, setting the scene up and who the characters are. That's more into the, I guess, fictional writing side of things. On the other hand, explaining a process is probably a type of paragraph that you'd use in a more technical environment. So, and most likely what most of you guys are going to be writing over the next few years. I use explaining a process quite a bit in writing for computer science, which is my other degree, where you start off with your topic sentence, which explains, it's what you're going to describe. And then maybe you'll end it with a colon instead of a period and list off what you're describing and the different steps of that process. So and the other way, instead of just numbering things out when you're explaining the steps of a process, is you have your topic sentence and then you say first, comma, and then your first step, then, and then the next sentence you use next, and then your final one is, and finally, this is the last thing in the process. So breaking it down into different steps is something pretty common in a lot of the science writing. A narrative paragraph is going to be probably more in the fiction area as opposed to nonfiction, where the narrator of the story or whatever book you're reading is just saying what's going on or what they're feeling or what they're thinking. And then the final one is using as examples to illustrate a point. So your topic sentence may be what you're trying to illustrate, the point you're trying to illustrate, and then the supporting facts could be an example of what that is. So I'm sure everyone has read paragraphs before or read writing where you're thinking, man, this person really didn't think this through, or something's weird about this paragraph, it doesn't really flow well. So ensuring paragraphs are coherent is a really important part of writing. Otherwise, I don't know, I've started books before where things, or started reading papers where even though it's a good content, it's not flowing well, and it's not maybe not interesting to read, or it kind of ruins it for the reader if your paragraphs don't flow well. So the first way that we can ensure that we do this is through repetition. And basically what repetition is, well, repetition means repeating, but in a paragraph, you may be repeating things in a different way so that your reader can see it from different aspects. So you're not just repeating the same sentence again within the paragraph, you're maybe coming at it from a different angle or from some different perspective. You're repeating your subject or what your topic is to reinforce that for the reader. Parallel structures is another way of ensuring that your paragraph flows. It's a way to help the reader see the connection among the elements and to follow your sentences. So again, you're just kind of like building it up for the reader. Everything's in parallel. Transitions are super important. This is another one where I'm sure you've been reading before, and one paragraph goes to the next one, and you're like, man, that person, whoever wrote that, they just totally went off subject. They should have made a new chapter or something. So transitions are super important. The main way to make sure that these flow well is to look at your last sentence of the paragraph that is first, and then the first sentence of your second paragraph, if that makes sense. So you're making sure that when your new paragraph starts, that first sentence is kind of at least tying in or flowing well into the next paragraph. They don't have to like absolutely tie into each other, but they do have to be in order. All right, a lot of times an opening paragraph will have an anecdote, which is maybe like a small story or something to get the reader, usually it's something interesting to get the reader ready for what's going to be in your paper. A quotation is another really common one that a lot of students use. You'll use a quote from a famous person, then set up, doesn't have to be a famous person, use a quote from someone, set up your paragraph, and then you'll have your thesis statement in there too. So many different ways to do opening paragraphs. A lot of times we'll see that students, there's a lot of like really common ways, and it's like everyone just uses that same style. As you start writing more papers throughout the next few years, try and be a little more unique with your opening paragraph instead of just such and such happened and here's my thesis. There's some ways to be creative within a scientific or an argument or argumentative paper without having to just stick to those typical things that everyone uses to start off a paper. Question is another way. You may want to ask something about what you're going to argue later on. So you may start the paragraph with a question about something, tell why that might not be true, and then say, this is what I think, this is my thesis. So that's another way of starting a paper that's a little more more interactive with your reader. So it gives them something to think about instead of just reading a description. The other one is a startling fact or something like that. If you're going to argue about like how crazy coronavirus is, you might, or COVID-19, you may want to start with this fact of this certain millions of people have this in the United States. And then this is why I'm going to argue my fact about this. Or this many millions of people are doing online school, and because of that, now this Zoom product or video learning is the superior way of teaching, something like that. And then just as important as opening paragraphs are conclusions, your concluding paragraph. So, and this is something I always skimp on, because by the time you're at your final paragraph, you're ready to be done with the paper and just turn it in. So you typically you get there and you're like, I'm just going to knock this out and then submit my paper. I'd suggest finishing your paper, sit on it overnight, and then go back and really make sure your concluding paragraph supports everything that's within the rest of the paper. And again, I'm talking about mainly about academic writing here, where your first paragraph is going to support or is going to build up the topic, and your concluding paragraph is kind of be a summary and bring everything together at the end. Even in some fiction writing and other types of nonfiction writing, you still are going to want to at least start out your paper or your chapter or whatever it is you're writing with an introduction, and then finish it off with that summary, that concluding paragraph. So mainly within the conclusion. I'm sure all you guys have seen before. You have your introduction. The way they always teach in elementary school is you have your introduction, your body, and your conclusion. So this is basically the same thing. Discussing the implications of your argument. So in your concluding paragraph, you're going to want to not just say this thesis that I started from the very beginning of this paper, it's true, done. No, you want to say what that means. That's where you're going to want to, that's where your opportunity is to say, this is how what I've concluded can fix things or help things, or it has this impact on whatever. You can conclude by asking a question. I've read a lot of papers where they leave it kind of open-ended. You can still argue that your point is true. You can support your facts all the way through the entirety of the paper, but then at the end, you can end that off with kind of like an open-ended question saying, well, what should we do now? Referring to something discussed at the beginning. This is where it could come back to one of those quotations that you may have used or a question that you asked at the beginning. It's a nice way to wrap up a paper. If you have a chance, if you can do this in a paper, it really brings it together well. I wish I had done this more when I was, first starting out in college. And earlier in my life. If you look back, even, like comedians do this kind of thing a lot. If you ever watch stand-up comedy, they start off with like a really funny sketch of jokes, and then later on they kind of can come back and use that earlier stuff, and it keeps the reader involved. Proposing an action may be another way to conclude your final paragraph. So again, you're still going to summarize everything that's gone on in the paper. You're going to have your concluding statement, and instead of leaving an open-ended question or discussing something from previous, you can propose an action on what your argument that you were talking about throughout this whole paper, how you can fix maybe a problem that you brought up, or use whatever you've argued about to address a problem. So proposing an action, that's if you can get to the end of your paper and have a good proposition for change or for action, you did a good job at writing your paper. Okay, like I said, all of this was basically straight out of your book. It has these chapters that I've been reading out of there do a really good job at explaining how paragraphs work. Make sure you get a chance to go through and read some of those examples. It really helps out. For now, that's all I have. We're probably going to do a little bit of exercises later in the week, and then I think you have a little bit of counseling or something on Friday. So we'll see you on Friday. I hope you guys have a good week and you had a really good long weekend. It's nice to just come to school for 2 weeks and then go straight into a holiday weekend. So thanks for your time and your attention. Have a good day.